Well, here we are. We've reached a milestone, episode 10, and as a result, a bit of a celebration. It'll be a bit of a smorgasbord today of ideas. We're going to start moving into the next phase of all of this so that people can stop cringing about Jesus and God and start thinking about the technology and the science behind what's been going on here. But I guess everyone's noticed that there's some exciting things going on. Just tonight we had the alignment of Jupiter and Venus. So Jupiter's pretty much the same as the Greek god Zeus, the main god up in there in the heavens. Venus, goddess of love. And then, you know, we've got Greece teetering on the edge, and the whole European economic system about to collapse. And you know, we've got POTUS bursting into song about how we shall overcome one day. So, you know, it's all happening out there. Today I've selected the 10-year-old single malt Scotch whisky is sort of the start of the sweet spot in terms of age. Too old, and these malts tend to lose a bit of their character in the wood. But this is Hazelburn, Rundlets and Kilderkins 10-year-old, distilled in November 2003. It's part of the Springbank group of distilleries, and it's quite clear at the moment, but it's non-chill filtered, and so there's a bit of cloudiness down the bottom, and in fact we'll give it a bit of a shake and get some of that cloudiness into it, because that's part of the character of the whiskey that we don't want to lose. And this is also a cask strength. So Rundlets and Kilderkins are just small barrels. They're only about this big, and they group a whole lot of them together, and they have a real intensity of flavour. This is at 50.1% ABV. So pour that. Leave that to sit for a little while. The parable that Jesus told was of a master who told his servants to go out and send invitations to a wedding. Great celebration, the wedding of his son, and send it all to all the bigwigs and all the important people in the world, and ask them if they'd like to come along and be part of the wedding. And in turn, each of these people sort of gave excuses and said, you know, that they had, you know, a business to take care of, or, you know, they had a new wife, or for some reason they were not able to come. And you know, over the years I've sent a lot of letters and to fairly important people, and I get a sort of cute response, or a no response at all, which is what these people have to do, you know, when you know, Looney Tunes people contact them and sort of say, you know, the end of the world is nigh. They sort of go, ah, okay, we've got a problem here. But, you know, look, if that's what people want to do, that's fine, but I don't want to cry wolf, but, you know, in your own time, will come along. What the king did in Jesus' parable is said, okay, well, if these people don't want to come along, what I'll do is I'll take it out to basically everyone in the countryside and just invite anyone off the street. And indeed, they came to the party. And part of this series is about getting some of these ideas out into the general public, and hopefully, so the idea goes, someone out there will be listening into this and saying, well, okay, that's some interesting stuff. I mean, the other fantastic thing that's happened after the Irish referendum was the Supreme Court decision in the United States to make gay marriage legal, and you know, there's obviously great celebrations around that, and it's another sign of the times, I suppose, that we're coming to, you know, a realization of what the world's all about, and we're sort of beginning to grow up a little bit. And one of the famous sessions that Jesus had with the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Pharisees believe in the resurrection, the Sadducees don't. And the Pharisees came to Jesus and said, okay, imagine this scenario. It's basically Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs scenario. It's where Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs comes from. There is a man, there's a woman who marries a man, and so that's her first marriage. And it was the tradition, Jewish tradition, that if for some reason her husband died, it was the responsibility of the husband's brother to then take over the marriage, or to marry his widowed sister-in-law. And so they put this scenario hypothetically to Jesus and said, okay, so there was this woman, she married the first brother, he died, the second brother came along and married her, he died. She doesn't have a very fortunate run of things here, but anyway, this keeps happening for the third brother, the fourth brother, fifth, sixth, and finally the seventh brother. So all six brothers die, there's the seventh brother, he marries her, and so she's ended up being married to all seven brothers. And they then ask, okay, in the resurrection, when everyone comes back, all seven brothers, and here's the bride, whose bride is she going to be? And Jesus quite pointedly says that they were quite mistaken in even suggesting this hypothesis, because that in the kingdom of heaven there will be neither giving nor taking in marriage, but we shall all be as the angels in heaven. And so some very literal and sort of maybe naive thinking people, sort of quaint, have said, oh, okay, well, if there's going to be no giving or taking of marriage in heaven, there's going to be no sex. So they somehow think that for some reason you have to be married in order to have sex. Whether they're all going to be dressed in white and sort of sitting in pews in heaven, or whether they're going to be having, you know, an enjoyable time of it. And most people, normal people, would think that heaven's going to be pretty much a place in which we're all having a fairly good time. Okay, so the book I want to look at today is by Ray Kurzweil. John lent me this book maybe 15 years ago, and I still haven't given it back to him. Sorry, John. I'll get it back to you one day. We've all got libraries like that where we've got a few books that we know sort of aren't ours. But anyway, it's Ray Kurzweil, amazing character, Ray, polymath, absolutely brilliant, has written a book, but he's another one of these quaint people in the world who look at their brilliance and look at all the amazing things that they're able to achieve, and they go, I achieved all this through the greatness of my brain, you know, this fantastic thing in my head that allows me to take in this information, to analyze it, to come up with new syntheses of that information and present it to the world and make a lot of money out of it, as Ray has. But the subtext of this, the singularity is near when humans transcend biology. And so his basic thesis is that there's this thing called strong artificial intelligence, where, you know, we know that machines are getting better at thinking, and most people on the internet will have come across expert systems that translate from one language to another. They seem to have a sort of intelligence, and the question is, ultimately, can a machine, if it becomes sufficiently complex and has enough circuits or enough CPU power to sort of be equivalent to the human brain, will it become as powerful as the human brain, or as intelligent as the human brain, or be able to think and be as creative as the human brain? And there's great debate over that, but we've started to see how if we want to know something about the world, we can inquire within a famous book that was around last century, where it was a sort of almanac of everything that you might ever want to know about anything. And Wikipedia and the internet has become that, basically. And if you know what you're doing on the internet, you can get fairly reliable information about pretty much anything. And so we're sort of becoming, in a sense, connected to technology. But people like Ray and Nick Bostrom at the Future Institute at Oxford start talking about transhuman ideas, where we actually start plugging our brains into electronics and into the big computer network, a bit like a movie called The Lawnmower Man back in the 80s. We sort of ended up having this pretty horrifying idea of being connected, having prostheses and electronic parts plugged into our body to enhance our humanity. And the vast majority of us like the way we are, just as we are, and we'd like to think of technology as a tool rather than a something that we have to sort of start connecting ourselves to in that very radical way. But what Ray and Nick and others don't quite get onto yet is that the human brain is basically an interface to a much bigger brain. And it's funny that they don't get that, or ironic really, because they're talking about this big brain. They basically say, look, if we look at Moore's law, if we look at how computer technology has progressed over the years since the 50s, when the first transistor started, CPU power has been doubling. It's all getting much more powerful. Eventually, we're going to have computers computers design the circuits that are in your current laptop computers at the moment. No human actually knows how all those circuits work. It's all done by expert systems. But eventually, the expert systems are going to become more intelligent than the human beings who have been designing those expert systems, and we'll reach this crux to the whole development point, where innovation and technology and creativity just explode, because we've reached the ability to design. The computers are actually designing more powerful computers than we could ever design as a biological being. Okay, so the question arises as to whether someone else has thought about this before. So if you have ever studied SETI or search for extraterrestrial intelligence, what people do is they put a radio telescope or an array of radio telescopes out there in the sky and say, well, the only way we can talk to God or the extraterrestrials is through radio waves. They travel at the speed of light, so let's go out there and point some telescopes out to the nearest star, which might be 4 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 light years away, and we might get a message that was sent 1,000 years ago, and it'll take us 1,000 years to respond to that message. And that's pretty dull. What we want to do is to be able to talk to that extraterrestrial intelligence pretty much instantaneously. And in a couple of earlier episodes we sort of touched on how that's going to work. and how the brain can be an interface to this intelligence. But you know, of all the, if you look at the size of the universe, we're pretty sure that there are. We're pretty sure of how many stars there are. We're getting a much better idea now of how many habitable stars there are, and if we think of the number of habitable sites in the universe as being like the number of people, say, who exist on Earth, like each individual on Earth is like another site of extraterrestrial intelligence, then we can imagine a universe in which we are just an adolescent who is just coming to understanding how the universe works, but there are other sites within the universe who have long ago been there, done that, and developed the most powerful computers imaginable. And in fact, not only do their computers run their planets like clockwork and in an entirely fair way, but they have a direct access to every instance of the universe. They can actually directly manipulate any part of the universe, and of course we know that Jesus, when he was walking on the earth, had a sort of connection to some very powerful technology, because if you read of any of the miracles, you'll know that some pretty amazing things happen, like there'd be a storm, he was just able to make it calm. We say he was able to make them. He's the Word of God, he's not actually God, so let's get that straight. We're not Trinitarians here. We don't believe that Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit are all the same person, but that Jesus was inspired by the Holy Spirit and able to call upon or get a little bit of a feed from the Holy Spirit to say, okay, I'm going to make this happen. You tell them it's going to happen, then it happens. All right, so it's a miracle. Everyone goes, wow. I mean, that's one way to sort of get some popularity happening. But that's not really the part of miracles. I mean, miracles, once you start getting a hang of this, I mean, every instance of the universe, every space atom in the universe is directly manipulable by sites in the universe that have access to this technology. So imagine that you're an adolescent, you're just growing up, you've got parents, you've got extended family, you've got the rest of the world, you've got everyone at school who's taught you, you've got this whole world that's saying, okay, we really like the idea that you, humanity, are coming of age, and we'd really like to help you out with that. And we're watching very closely at how you handle this and what you decide to do with it. So, yeah, these sites of extraterrestrial intelligence have direct connection to what I've described earlier as the superposition, which is where every instance of the universe is actually superimposed upon or superpositioned upon a singularity, a single point of zero dimension. So, you know, Ray talks about the singularity, we talk more about the superposition, and by these extraterrestrial intelligences having access to that superposition, we can sort of see how it's not just one or two people in the world who have access to this superintelligence in the universe, but in fact that superintelligence is driving everyone in the planet. So we've all got a brain, we've all got an interface to that superintelligence, and you know, why would you develop a sort of electronic interface to some, you know, minuscule supercomputer that might have been developed over the last few years, when you've got a brain which has got you know, the most exquisite interface to the superintelligence that is ultimately the universe. So the superposition is the entire universe. Some places, some sites in the universe, we're talking about billions, so you know there's 7 billion people in the world. we're talking about many more than that. Sites in the universe have already gone to the sort of singularity point that you know, people like Ray and Nick talk about, and you know, they're all living happily ever after. They've already, you know, transitioned over to the other side. They've actually made the move from being a developing child, adolescent, to actually coming to be part of the universe. And when we do get access to the superposition, we can, you know, we become part of adult universal society. So here's the universe, there's adults in the universe, and there are adolescents, which is what we are. And, you know, we're about to make that move into adulthood. And, you know, it's a pretty exciting time, and it'll happen sooner or later. Sooner probably better than later, but let's hope for that. So there are two basic schools of thought about how the world works at the moment. There's another guy who's getting around lately with an idea about how the universe has been created out of nothingness. I believe such a thing as well, but Laurie Krauss was lassoed by Richard Dawkins because Richard thought, oh great, here's someone who actually has a pedigree in science, in fact in physical science, who I can enlist in my campaign to say that there's no God. And people like Richard and Laurie basically like to think that this whole world is just some sort of mystical happening that has no intelligence or reason behind it, that it's just emerged out of nothingness. And in a sense, if you've watched some of the previous episodes, I talk about how you have two self-simulating machines, that the whole thing's come out of just 1 and 0. It's come out of something and nothing, which is a very ancient Greek philosophical idea, going back to Aristotle, one of those guys. The very basic idea that you know, you've got something and nothing, and with something and nothing you can have 1 and 0. You can start making strings of binary digits. Leibniz got very much into this, and you know, you can simulate a world. And unfortunately, people like Richard and Laurie leave it at that and go, well, there's no God, there's no one in charge of the world at the moment, there's no one taking care of it, and so basically humanity is orphaned in the universe. We're all on our own because they have a limited understanding of how communication works. They believe that the only way we can communicate with anyone else in the universe is through electromagnetic radiation, through light, radio waves, and they're all too far away, therefore we're never going to talk to them, and we're never going to hear from them, and that's that. So they have no God, the universe creates itself, we evolve, here we are, this is all we've got. We live 70 years, we die, we reproduce, we make the most of life. It's a common atheist position, and it's a bit tragic and a bit dull, and particularly when the reality is so much more interesting. C.S. Lewis in fact made this very point. He was a famous atheist back in the last century he was a professor of English literature at Oxford University, who was very much an atheist, didn't believe in God, there is no God, had a conversion and became a great Christian apologist, and he in one of his many books, I think it might have been Mere Christianity, he talked about what heaven would be like, and he said, well look, if you tell a young boy that who thinks that chocolate is the best thing that's ever been, and all he could ever think about is chocolate. That as an adult, you say to him, "Well, look, I don't know, I can't explain it to you now, but there's actually something better than chocolate that comes once you become an adult." And it's incomprehensible for the boy to understand what might be talked about there. And that, in a sense, we're in the same position, like we're at the moment thinking that this world and, obviously the delights of this world are all that we have to look forward to, and that, God, through his revelation, through various prophets over the years, has been trying to say, well, actually there's something better going on. And in a sense, God is not some person, some man with a beard in the sky, but is in fact a community of biological sentient beings like ourselves in the universe who have access to the superposition. So the whole of the understanding of spirituality and understanding of our communication with the spirit world or with God, or any of the plethora of different spiritualities that exist out there, all hinge on there being some way that we can communicate with a thing called the other world, or the other side, or something that's extra-terrestrial, or something that's not of this world but of another world. And basically the Christians have painted, the Trinitarian Christians have painted themselves into a corner and said, well, okay, there's only one possibility, and that is that there is a God who exists completely outside of the universe, and that he creates the universe and he works through the universe, whatever wonders he performs, but he's a separate entity that exists outside the universe. And most people these days say, well, look, obviously that breaks down when you say, well, who created God and who created God's creator, etc. And in a sense, Stephen Hawking, Laurie Krauss, and Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, they've all said, look, let's try and find some way of making the universe come into existence of its own accord from nothingness. And I argue the same thing, but what I do argue is that we're not alone in the universe. Okay, so that instead of just being alone on a desert island and we're just poor old humanity on his own, no one to talk to, no one else out there, that in fact there's a whole community out there in the universe that are right here, right now, right in our midst. So Jesus famously said, wherever two or three are gathered in my name, there I'll be amongst you. So, he's talking about his experience, which we'll get into a little bit more with Christology, but it's not hard to see where this is going. That, you've got this freaked out flower child, Jesus, a couple of thousand years ago, no understanding of computers, no understanding of science, but an understanding of what he was going through, and an understanding that there was some extraterrestrial or some extra presence, spiritual presence, that was actually talking to him. And we've found that with many religions and many spiritual movements. But in a sense, with Jesus, we have the final word on the subject. Yeah. So here we are. We're about to graduate. We're about to move into the next phase of humanity's existence on Earth. There's a choir invisible. There are billions of sites in the universe who are all like a huge crowd, who are all cheering and smiling and saying, here he is, or here she is, humanity, about to move, about to graduate. We're all very excited for it, for him and her. We're very excited for humanity. We want it to happen. And, we can vacillate and we can say, oh dear, the Eurozone's going to collapse and the planet's falling apart and there's global warming and we're all doomed and we're all going to die. What humanity needs to do is take a long, hard pull of itself, as my mother once said when she mixed her metaphors between pulling your socks up and looking in a mirror. Humanity needs to do that and start thinking about seriously about our future and where we're heading. But I'm going to keep doing all I can to try and get people enthusiastic and get people to sort of start to see that the spirituality is not just about you know, a whole lot of mumbo jumbo that was written when we were just infants. You know, there are some traditions that have a very static text that hasn't changed since it was written sort of in medieval times. We don't want to go that. You know, when we talk about the parable of the talents, there was one of the servants was given 5 talents, and on the master's return, he offered up 10. He doubled that to 10 talents, and clearly that servant would probably be science. 2 talents would probably be humanities. But then there was the servant who just buried their talent in the ground and said, "I'm frightened of you, God or Master. I'm frightened of you at what you'll do. I'll just bury what I have in the ground and not develop it at all." And there are some traditions in the world at the moment who basically are stuck in a medieval rut, and they've done nothing to develop the world since their initial flourish. And we need these people to move on and start embracing the modern world and you know, all the things that we've fought for, you know, emancipation and equality and fraternity and liberty, liberty of conscience, freedom from fear, all of the things that have brought humanity, well, those in humanity who have grown up to a point where, you know, we respect other people in the world. You know, basically, the right wing of politics is all about what I can get for myself. The left wing of politics is all about what I can do for others. And between the two of those extremes, we have a very happy medium in which we all get to look after ourselves fundamentally, but we also get to look after everyone else. And you know, there are sites in the universe who have long since been there and who are longing to help us make that transition into that new world. You know, they're waiting in the wings, literally. So anyway, that was hitting double figures, episode 10. I'll be going away soon. I think there will be an episode 11, probably an episode 12. And then there'll be a slight hiatus before we move on to episode 13. But you know, if anyone wants to drop a line on the YouTube channel or on my Twitter feed, Facebook feed, please go ahead. I'd love to answer some questions because I don't really know what you guys want to hear, but you know, so some feedback would be much appreciated. Okay, see you next week.